All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. And I'm super excited because I have my friend Josh here, who's a teacher. He's been teaching, gosh, as long as I was teaching. How long has it been now, Josh?
21 years.
21 years. Crazy. So just to let you know, Josh is a grade 9 teacher in Australia, and I'm really excited to be talking to him. He's also a learning support specialist living in Brisbane. And Josh, I think just let's start with letting our listeners know, maybe tell me a bit about, or tell us a bit about yourself. I already know about you, but because we've been friends for so long, but tell us a bit about yourself. What motivated you to become a teacher? What grades and areas have you taught? Anything you feel would be interesting.
Yeah, great. No worries. Thanks, Maris. It's good to be on here as well. Yeah, I guess for me, I've really taught every year. I've taught in England, in Canada, and in Australia, New South Wales and Queensland, which do have their differences, but probably not as much as the countries do. But I've taught every year. My probably focus area or main area of strengths would be your year 4 to year 9, maybe year 10. So your 11 and 12 is probably that little bit more complex curriculum wise side of things. And the younger ones, I originally thought that's what was meant to teach, but it takes a special person to teach those little ones. So good on you if you do. Yeah, so I would say between my key areas would be year 4 to about that year 9, year 10. And most of my life in teaching has been learning support. So I've been the head of a learning support department for years. And yeah, it's just, I've talked a lot. I've done a lot of webinars and seminars and whatnot, PD in delivering and discussing learning support and how to support students of all abilities and all ages and all difficulties.
And do you feel like was that sort of a calling for you? Like how did you sort of get into that area of learning support?
Yeah, I originally, like I said, I thought I was supposed to do the young ones. So I really thought that's what I was supposed to do. But I found that I just kind of leaned more towards high school. And then one of my first pracs, so I did my teaching in Australia the year before you did yours.
Yeah.
One of my pracs was at a learning support school. They needed someone. So I said, sure, no problem. And then really it's followed me to England, where that's what I did, learning support there at a high school. And then in Canada, I was in a classroom in Canada and in Toronto. And however, the learning support was still quite active, and I had a lot to do with it. And then coming to Australia, learning support's been basically where I've gone most of the way through here. So it's been, I don't know, it wasn't really necessarily where thought I would start off, but it's definitely been one where I've gone since then.
Awesome. And have you noticed like over time, if there's been more students that are classified as needing like learning support, or has it kind of remained consistent? What have you noticed in terms of like within the last 20 years?
I would say numbers, there's been an increase. It's a good question too, but numbers has been an increase, but also types that are diagnosed. Now, I would imagine again, globally, depending upon who's out there listening, it would be different in different areas. But certainly for me, the last few years here in Australia, it has been mental health has been a massive increase. So whereas before, say autism or ADHD were the bulk of your students at different times, I would certainly say mental health is the one that's increasing. And for me, it's probably the one I have the least.
Small drop in the Wi-Fi there. So, Josh, sorry, just continue on. I'm interested with the uptake with mental health. So does that mean you're receiving students that are more in like depressed, or what are some of the issues with mental health that you're seeing?
Probably anxiety the highest, depression, then followed by depression. But even some to the extent where I guess it's students that are dealing with more severe things like self-harm and whatnot. I think it's multiple factors that have affected this in the sense where we come from. COVID times certainly I think had an impact. I think that the pressures and anxieties in today's world running as quick as it does, I think a lot of the students struggle with that. And partly for me, I feel it's one where staff in general are probably not as well trained because we are teachers. We're not
Yeah.
psychologists. We're not doctors. We're not all these other things that we, have to be at times. But the school I'm currently at, which is Hillcrest Christian College, a great school, and they have a whole department now where they have learning support department as well. But they've got a department where they have, I think, more social workers than actual psychologists on site, and then some of the clients will have their psychologist who then contacts the social worker who liaises with us. So it's sort of, and parents. So it's sort of this, whole group of people involved in supporting this one child. So as they always used to say, it takes a village, right? So,
That's exactly what I say.
yeah,
Yeah, it takes a village, especially in
it's a great
today's
scenario.
society with all the, the issues bombarding students. That's why I want to do these interviews, because I feel like it does take a village, right? We don't always understand sort of what we could be doing to help, and by listening to someone else who's doing the same thing, it makes a big difference. So do you find that, is it mainly when the students just kind of get their feelings out and talk about things, does it help, or are there any specific strategies that you're learning, or is it kind of every student is different?
It's a mix. It's a mix. So I've recently been trained. Well, it was a couple of years ago now. I think I've just fallen out of training in mental health first aid, which is
Okay.
a course that they do. So I think probably too that course has helped me make me more aware. So maybe I'm noticing and seeing it more because I've got a bit more understanding around its impact. But it's I guess unlike the other, like ASD, and sometimes it is students who have the multi-diagnosis. So you've got your students with on the autism spectrum disorder who may have anxiety as well. Also, the other one I find is interesting is trauma. Trauma will
Mhm.
mask a lot of these same type of things. We boil it down, we find out it's that rather than it is, ADHD or ASD or anxiety, which certainly is still anxiety related. But we're getting ones who have experienced a fire at home, and whenever the fire alarm goes, or whenever if a car alarm goes nearby us or whatnot, and we find that there's impact that way. So it's a matter of preparing them and letting them know if the fire alarm's coming. We can do that. So there's ones that are quite manageable and
Mhm.
ones that we find are really difficult. If it's a social interaction one, school's full of social interaction, as I'm sure we'll talk about later. The program I'm in now has a lot of social interaction. So, and you're out in society, you're out moving around. So it's really quite hard when the impact is along something around those lines, that they struggle with. So it really does vary, but it's certainly an increase. It's certainly for us a bit more not difficult to manage, but get a better understanding of, I guess, and to make sure staff have a better understanding of this area.
So what advice would you give, like any, like a student, a teacher, or even a parent who might suspect that the student, like that there is a more higher level of anxiety or depression or mental health issues? What would you recommend, or what advice would you give them moving forward? What would you tell them to sort of do as like a first step?
It's great, great. The key thing I think for teachers is we have to be aware that we can't diagnose these things. We can, there are sometimes little questionnaires you can do. You can give an idea to say that's there, but we've got to be very careful ourselves of
Yeah,
not
that's a good
diagnosing it.
point.
That's a psychologist. In
Yeah.
my scenario, I'm lucky because we've got the social workers here, so I can say, look, this student's showing some of these signs. I'm a little worried. Can you guys have a talk? Many of the schools I've worked at, that's not the case. So if you don't have that, I guess it would be liaising with that parent as soon as you possibly can to say, look, I've noticed these things. I've witnessed this. My feeling or my understanding of this area, it might be something worth having a look at. The vast majority of parents I've had that conversation with, it's gone really well. And parents have then followed up and tried to find that. Now, it's a little harder sometimes to get it for testing here. It can take 6 months or longer, which I'm sure is a lot of places around the world. That's a difficulty, but that's another area you can sort of go over from there. That's a struggle, but you will get there. And then a few times I have had parents where they've struggled with that. Most often, I've found that the parents themselves possibly had it
Yeah.
or lived through it and have not dealt with it themselves. So it's an interesting conversation, but it's one if you get the support from a team or have other members who've seen it. I certainly wouldn't probably do those things alone. I guess I did in my leadership role, but even the role I'm in now, I probably would just try to get other people involved and then have that conversation to try to smooth it over or hope it goes well.
Yeah, I think you make a really valid point with, parents, especially if you're raised, more old school, you didn't go and talk to someone about your trauma or your, anxiety or your depression. It's only recently come into light in the last 5 years. I think it's so important to that for parents that if they have also been through trauma, that they also should be going out and talking to someone. And it's okay. It doesn't make you, there's this stigma sometimes that it makes you like weak, but I feel that it actually makes you strong, that you have the strength to go out and talk to someone about how you're feeling. And it's always like I tell my students, like if you had a big gash on your arm, you would go to a doctor. But if you have a big gash on your heart or your brain, you just hide it, right? No, you should also go to a doctor and get it fixed, right? Try and talk it through. So that's great that Australia is trying to really help out with that for sure.
Yeah, same thing for teachers too. And I know our
Yeah.
school offers 6 councils that you can go to and use that. You can have 6 sessions without you having to pay. And I think that there probably will be a lot of organizations. The EQ side of things, I think, is a real push now. IQ and EQ, and I think the
Yeah.
EQ side of things is really gaining momentum and its importance. And really, I know it for us here, we like to do the full, whole rounded student coming from all sides, really, that IQ is important. But if you get the EQ and everything else right, then the IQ will follow. If the EQ is not right and there's something off and there's an imbalance or there's something to struggle, then that's really hard for that it has an impact on the IQ.
Yeah.
And big over here, like the whole Aussie bloke side of things, where they say, toughen up and have a cup of cement, that kind of stuff like that. And the whole big push now is the Are You Okay Day, to just check on to make sure you're finding out, are people okay? Because it is something that I agree with you. You're stronger for dealing with it than you are weaker and keeping inside. So it's yeah.
Yeah. I think like you say with the Aussie bloke thing, especially for men and boys, being able to tell them that it's okay to also talk. It's not just a female thing, right? Everybody has, no, everybody sometimes comes across difficulties in their mental health. And then if you go and talk to someone, it just allows you to push through your life at such a higher level, as opposed to being, sort of trapped within with maybe an issue that you're dealing with. So I think that's really important. I'm really glad you brought up the teacher mental health in Australia, because I think it's important for other schools around the world even to hear what you're doing. So you said, so basically teachers have 6 free mental health sessions. And is that with a counselor on site, or do they have, a list of counselors you can go to, or how does it work?
So I don't know exactly that side of things, but it's not on site because it is
Okay.
anonymous. So you keep it anonymous so that you don't have that set up. I'm not exactly sure how they know
Right.
it's your 6 sessions or whatnot if someone else does it. But there's a company, I believe, that we're affiliated with. Then you contact them and then they set you up with who the person is and whatnot. I haven't used it as of yet. I was actually thinking about using it this year, so it's probably good timing.
There you
And,
go.
I'll know more if we want to have a follow-up session on it.
Okay.
But yeah,
Amazing.
it's look, I only see that as increasing, and being and more from there, because I believe a lot of companies will see the value in the EQ, whereas before, people thought, well, what is this mental health day break and whatnot,
Mm.
and they see that. Look, I'm going to say, and I don't have an actual stats for this. I reckon there's more mental health days that are taken off than actual sick days, and if not,
Yeah.
I would imagine it's going to be.
I agree. I agree. And like I mean, there's a few, theories on where the increase in mental health is coming from, the issues with mental health and teachers. But what do you feel are some of the biggest reasons that teachers are really battling with their mental health right now?
Probably the load.
Yeah.
is put on. It's just changed so much. We were supposed to be counselors, doctors, psychologists, engineers. We have to work out problems of work out
Administrators.
well,
Major.
mind readers, right? Everything.
Mind
Like
readers. Yeah.
so, yeah. The teaching side of thing is honestly the smallest component of what I do. And
Yeah.
oddly, that was the biggest part of the job, 15, 20 years ago. And before that, certainly, if the major job is you were up there in front teaching, but that's now so small so small portion of what you're supposed to be doing. We keep in touch all the time now. Now we've got a 48-hour reply to email. That's time, which is a fair one. But I've been in other places where within 24 hours you had to reply, and
I've usually heard
sometimes I was
24
getting
hours. Yeah.
messages at 8 or 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday, so it's really difficult if 20, all the time you're on, and there are jobs where you're on call, like a doctor or something, but I guess you're prepared and you're set for that. Teaching
Yes.
just seems to me to expand in this, 7 days a week, 24-hour a day job. Not that we're doing stuff all those times, but that it does that. They're even looking at increasing, like decreasing holiday time by increasing the amount of non-contact time. So we're going to have to start to do more PD during our holiday time and whatnot. So I always find holiday time for us, and we'll talk about, I'm sure later, allows us to go back down to our base level, our baseline. And if we don't have that time to do that, then we don't go or bring ourselves back down, and we're already heightened by the time we come in, back to work or whatnot. So, and I've only just started back last week, and the kids came today for the first day. So it's yeah, it's interesting the amount. It definitely has changed in the time that I've been teaching.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think also, teachers, I know a lot of teachers who are so worried about getting into like trouble that they feel that they need to respond to an email at 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday. And I think, for your own mental health, you have to have those boundaries. You have to be able to set boundaries for yourself and, maybe turn off your notifications for your email on the weekend or something like that. You are not obligated because it's like you say, if you're on call, that's different because that's within your contract, essentially, right? But but you also need a break from being forced to do certain things. And I know for a fact that there are teachers out there who put those boundaries in place and nothing happens. It's not like someone comes to them and says, "Oh, you should have answered that email at 9 o'clock." Nothing happens because those boundaries are respected and understood, So I feel like I get really passionate about that.
No, I agree with you. We have to be advocates for our own mental health, and
Yeah.
sometimes if we don't put that stuff in place, and you know me, I'm a caring, loving person, and I want to do everything I can do, but I had to
Yeah.
learn to say no. There
Yeah.
had to be a time where I just said, "Look, this is my sixth trip I've gone on with the kids this year. I can't do another one. You're gonna have to pick someone else to do it because and trips are wonderful and I love them, but they're field trips or excursions or whatnot, but you're again, when you're there, you are pretty much 24/7 with
Yeah.
them. Even when you're sleeping, stuff comes up and things happen. So it's something you need a downtime from. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, we got to make sure we're advocates for ourselves and learn what we can do and can't do and support ourselves and know that there is always someone who will have your back. You know what I mean? And making sure things are going well. So
Absolutely. I feel like it's almost like performance abuse, right? You want to do well, you want to add value, you want to be the best teacher you can be, but then because your performance is so high, that gets abused by you being like, "Oh, well, Josh will be able to, he's the one you want to go on the trip because he's so good at what he does on those trips. Like, make sure you get Josh." And then it's like, well, don't get Larry. Like Larry's going to mess everything up, right? Because Larry has kind of set that kind of bar for himself, perhaps. And those teachers. And I feel that's why the boundaries are so important because you don't want that performance abuse, right? You want to do your best, but you don't want extra more added to the load in order just because you're good at your job. So that's why I feel, yeah, definitely I know exactly what you're saying there. You have to, as teachers, we have to put those boundaries in place for ourselves for sure.
Sometimes I feel Larry does it on purpose.
Yes, I agree. Larry does do it on purpose. I think so too.
But his mental health could be very good.
Yeah.
So,
We all need to aspire to be Larry, right? A
that's
little
right.
bit. We need a little bit
We
of
need some
Larry in
Larry. A
us.
bit of Larry in all of us. A bit
Bit of Larry. Amazing. Okay, Josh, I actually wanted to ask you because you started, I don't know if it was this year or before, but I know you were um, the Rise program. So when did you get involved with the Rise program? I don't think it's everywhere. What exactly
no,
is it?
no. So its inaugural year was last year at our school. It's based on other programs, but I don't believe there's any exactly like Rise, but it's based on other programs. So they started January of last year. I came in August of last year. So I finished off the group that was just there, had a bit of time with them, and then the new group we started with them. So they actually started, they do term 4, year 9s become year 10s. So you've got a full year of 10, 11, 12, and they actually reduce the year in 9, which I actually think is quite good. Curriculum wise here in Australia, at least, year 9 is probably not as cumbersome. It's a lot of building on year 7 and 8. And a few new concepts where 10 is probably another not bad year, but 11 and 12, there's so many new concepts that you're going off of that it's good to have that full year. And it's just quite a good program in the sense that it supports outdoor education as well as being off-site. So I'm on the Gold Coast, and the vast majority of us are at the Reedy Creek campus, but the year 9s get bused every day. So we come to Reedy Creek and we get bused to the Coolangatta campus, which is 20 minutes away normally, but there's a bit of road work right now, so probably about a half hour of recent time. And we're in a shopping center, so we're actually on the level 2, which is the 3rd floor of the shopping center, with an NRMA near us and a couple other organizations right next to us. And we teach down there. The beach is right there, so we do our PE down at a footy field or the beach, or there's a grass area close to the beach. Sometimes we'll do like a touch footy there or whatnot. So it just there's a lot of movement. So students with like ADHD, it's great for, because you see all these issues in the classroom and whatnot. Ours is so well spread out that your double lesson is an hour and 20 minutes. You get that once a week, and the other times you get an hour lessons, and then sometimes you get 40-minute lessons. So there are some longer lessons, but there's time in between. There's time to move around. There's time for them to get up. They're down at a beach for lunch, or they're at the park for lunch. They all play as a group. Look, it's taken a lot. There's a lot of risk management. We have a guy who's in charge of risk. We have a guy who's in charge of curriculum, and then we have a guy who's in charge of students. So there's 3 leaders, plus myself on the team and 6 or 8 other teachers that form the whole team that we take that. It's 164 kids, I think was the last count.
That's what I was going
Learning
to ask you. Is
supports
it
about
all the
20.
grade 9s, or do you enter
All the
into this
grade
program? Okay, so it's all the grade 9s that do
grade
this.
9s,
Okay.
correct. Yeah. And we've had some parents sign in to be part of it. Other
Nice.
parents saying, "Oh no, we want more of an academic year in year 9." I've always considered year 9 the lost year. I have a lot to do with year 9 throughout my time, and it's always been one where the students are maturing at different ages. There's a lot going on biologically inside of them, and sometimes they're not really focused on learning.
Yeah.
So my own daughter just finished year 9. She's in year 10 now. So I got a pretty good understanding in that sense. And so it's good, I think, to push the curriculum into a smaller amount of time, but also give them these different ways to present. So it's very project based. It's very, lesson oriented in the fact that it is academic, but we also focus on the EQ. We also focus on our support at the school, so our beliefs and values at the school. So we do service. So on Fridays, they have something called Future Fridays, where they can do service activities and be part of the community and help out. We've got old age homes. We do Vinnies. We do soup kitchens and anything to support like that. So it just allows the students, what I found, were far more aware of people around them and of others, and far more responsible than, say, your average year 9 students from not doing the program. So it is quite beneficial, not only academics. Again, I think we're looking at the fact that the EQ gets done well, and then they build from there. So the academics can again be more of a focus and can come not necessarily come easier, but they're more prepared. They're more
Right.
confident. They're more, um, and with that brings that success in the academics, which we've only had the one semester here of them being in year 10 so far, but it's showing good results so far.
And I think like with the EQ, which is their emotional intelligence, so out of curiosity, like if you were to go to another district and the grade 9 program, the grade 9s didn't have this program, are there certain lessons that obviously have been taken out of your curriculum, or like would a regular grade 9 program also be looking at emotional intelligence, or not really? Is it more specific to this program, this RISE program?
I would say probably not as much.
Okay.
I'd probably say it's something that's limited to programs, not only RISE, but other programs where that's become a focus.
Yeah.
We've already had a couple of local schools come take a look at it last year and see what we're
Brilliant.
doing and what we've done. I know there's some in Melbourne and Sydney, so New South Wales and Victoria,
Yeah.
where they're very focused on this. Probably a really well-known school here in Melbourne has a program. I think it's Treetops or Tree something, where it's very focused on the same type of thing, and their success shows in year 9 is phenomenal, and then it sometimes, depending, can peter off a bit in their 10, 11, 12, because I guess if it's such success at that in the year 9 that they're not noticed that. We haven't noticed that yet, but we only have the 1 year of data to go
Yeah.
off
I
so
just think
far.
it's
So
brilliant
she's doing
because,
well.
yeah, sorry. I just think it's brilliant because something has to change in the way education is being taught, right? This is not 1872 anymore. And we can't, just like technology is moving quickly. It's incredible to me how the methods of teaching and education are moving so slowly. And I think I hope people listen to this and really investigate the RISE program, because it sounds like exactly something that so many districts could benefit from, or so many kids could benefit from. So thank you. Yeah, I
No problem.
absolutely, I love it.
I was actually getting, disenchanted with teaching because of that. But it wasn't changing. More and more was being put onto us. It was getting to the point where something's going to break here, guys. If it's me or whatever else
Yep.
it is, something's going to break. And I think for me, is really, I've only been there, like I said, for a little over a term, but it really has reignited my passion for learning and for working with these students to support in a way that gives them a benefit. And some of the same ones you see in the classroom are so very different if we're putting out them on surfboards or surf life saving or fishing or doing all the other stuff we're doing. You see them in such a different light, like
Yep.
you would when you go on a field trip or an excursion. But we do that every week, so there is no excursion, no camp, because every week we're doing all that kind of stuff with them all the time. So yeah, it's
That's
very good.
That's incredible. It's incredible. I imagine, yeah, you even, because I think like you wouldn't necessarily need to be right next to a beach to do this. As long as you had access to some sort of space that you could take the kids on a regular basis, then it's definitely something to look into. I hope more students or administrators listen to this and realize, oh, this is something we should look into, because like you said, you're not the only teacher who's become disenchanted. I mean, teachers are leaving teaching at an alarming rate. And I think this is one of the reasons, is because it's not changing. It's not, changing. And the kids themselves are getting incredibly frustrated, which makes it more frustrating um, for the teachers. Anyways, but I wanted to ask you, like, with teaching high school, and I know you are doing this different program, but you were telling me about a few strategies with like routines. What did you call them? Like curb cuts,
Curb cuts and baseline.
and baseline. Yeah. So these are, what are those things when it comes to
Okay.
dealing with high school students?
Yeah. So I've been using these ones for years. And most of the times I've done my PD and stuff like that, it's been on these two areas. So baseline, I'll start off with. Baseline is just your norm. I think it's none of these are my concepts I've developed, but just
No
ones
problem.
I've grabbed and used and changed and manipulated and done
Yep.
whatnot. But
That's okay. It's the way to do
I
it.
think it was PBS that first came out with it, but I'm not certain of that. But it was just your baseline is like your norm. So I always show a chart saying, okay, there is no normal anymore. Getting connected, knowing students, the more you know about them, the more you know when they're at their normal, and more importantly, the more you know when they're off their normal. So if we can pick up a lot of these issues that can occur on the earlier stages, and we don't keep building upon that, then I think it's beneficial, because the more we know about our students, the more we'll know if they're off that baseline, and we can try to stop it from getting into something bigger.
Okay.
And that really, that impacts and that I say that you need to do it as a staff member. You need to know your students, but you also need to know yourself. And if you need to have like a significant other or a friend tell you, what sets you off, what's, how do you recognize when you're going off your baseline? I think it's important for us to know that as well. And maybe that's when we do have to say, no, I can't do this next thing.
Yeah.
I actually need a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Or otherwise we find ourselves breaking down and taking a lot more time,
Yeah.
and the
Exactly.
tough part there is when we do take the time like that, which I believe people deserve, certainly, but it has an impact on the other teachers, because more often than not, they can't just get a casual in to cover all of that. And if they do get a casual, they can't do some of those extracurricular roles and other roles that other teachers then have to step in and do. And then it's just it's a cycle, and
Oh
then
yeah.
someone else gets off their baseline, and
Yeah.
it builds and goes. So it's just a matter of looking out for ourselves, for other staff members, and ultimately for the students, really.
No,
And then
100%, because
curb
it's,
cuts.
yeah, so I was to say in South Africa, with what you're saying there, if a teacher is absent, it's other teachers normally that will cover that class, right? So your frees get taken away. And I mean, in the UK, we actually had one staff member that was dedicated to covering other teachers. And I wish schools would sort of implement that more, because it is very difficult when you're expecting that time and you don't get it as a teacher, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, I
Again,
just wanted
again,
to,
no,
yeah.
again, we're quite lucky at this school. We have three, one in the juniors, one in the middle school, one in the seniors. Same thing. They're a full-time teacher who just goes in and covers classes.
Yeah.
But like always, sometimes you'll have 17 teachers off on the one day and
Yeah.
none on the other day. So it's kind of, it has that mix, but still it is such a good practice to be able to have that
Absolutely.
certainty in place.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks. And the curb cuts you were saying, sorry. Yeah.
Curb cuts, yeah. So curb cuts are those cuts in the curb. It doesn't matter if you spell the curb whichever way. There's a curb. The North American, the Aussie.
I know, right?
Yeah. But it's the cuts in the curb that generally originally they were there. So it's universal design for learning is what this comes from. And it's originally was there for wheelchairs, and it went global quite quickly. But they were built for wheelchairs with wheelchairs in mind. But then we had people with bikes, skateboards, luggage. The vast majority of us walk across where there is that curb, that cut in the curb, except for the ones that really want to go quickly. They just sort of jump the side and go over. But
Yeah.
the idea is it was one thing in mind, one person in mind, or one group of people in mind, but it supported multiple students. So one of the things I used is primary school. We know really well how to put a table on the board so that students know it's maths, then science, then recess, then English, then humanities, then lunch, and then PE in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But we don't tend to do that in secondary classes. So what I used to do is I used to put them on the board in secondary classes. And I used to say, okay, we're coming in, you're coming to history or science, whatever the class is, because that's what they're coming to. So I don't really need that. I did a learning aim to tell them what they're supposed to learn in this subject, because I don't understand why we don't tell students what they're supposed to learn over these periods.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people do
They
that.
do like that, knowing what the topic is about. Yeah. What they're going to learn.
Yeah. And then at the end of the lesson, I'd always check, did they learn that? Because if not, I got to cover it again. I'd always have a thought of the day, which was a thought-provoking question that they may not necessarily answer then, they may answer later.
Nice.
And then I had a plan or a timetable sort of what the lesson was going to be like. So I used things like IW, which was individual work, PW, pairs work, GW, group work, teacher talk was TT, summary of the lesson. So I'd say teacher talk, 5 to 10 minutes. Then I'd say individual work for 15 minutes, and then pair work for 15 minutes to finish off the 5-minute summary. And that was the lesson. So I'd give them the task, then they'd have to talk about the task. I'd tell them what to do. Then they'd have the task in front of them individually, work on it. Then they work with a partner to then work out, how did they go? What did they learn? So they learn from each other. Sometimes we would give it back to the class. So that might be the next lesson. We might have a few people bring them up, and then I would summarize it to make sure they got from that topic. With the RISE program, we do the same thing on the bus. So your partner you're sitting with next to on the bus, you're supposed to talk about that lesson and see if they got what they were supposed to from the other person. So at least you've got that other person that might have got a different understanding.
Right.
So it's such a benefit and reinforces that learning. And oftentimes it's harder on a bus, but oftentimes I would try to pick the pairs or have different activities where they got different pairs because otherwise they pick the same people all the time.
Of
And
course.
sometimes certainly I'd try to have pairs where I knew if, especially groups, I would always have one really strong student in a group, two that were struggling, and one that was kind of your BC that was sort of doing what it was going to support those ones that were struggling in getting that understanding. And then at first people were like, but then the A student's going to miss out. And I'm not really, because the
Mm.
A student got to teach it. And
Yeah.
we all know if you can teach it, you know it better than if you're just
That's
learning.
it. Teach a man to fish, right? Or teach a person to
Yeah,
fish.
right,
Right? They
right. So
then they learn that they learn the skill, right? Rather than catching the fish for them. So I absolutely agree, right? If you can teach it. Um, before I get to my last question, I just want to know if you had like advice to give to a new high school teacher. So someone's like coming out of teachers college and they want some advice from you. What are like one or two things you would tell them in terms of, teaching high school or things that you feel might benefit them?
yeah, great. One of the things I will say is that at one time, I thought about going in to be a professor to teach teachers. I don't think it's done overly well. I think it's
Hmm.
getting better. But my focus on the teaching, if say you said it was a 4-year degree to do teaching, then I would do 3 years of on the job training, 1 year of the theory. We all remember the
Yeah.
Bono's hats. We all remember Hattie. We all know all these theorists that I almost never use inside the classroom saying, he's got a yellow hat, he's got a
Yeah.
yellow hat. We don't do these things, right? They're
No.
wonderful theories to learn. We can do it all in a year and it's great. But the more time we have, and I would say there's other jobs like nursing where I would do the same thing. And again, I don't know exactly what's done in nursing, so I shouldn't say talk about it too much. But I, I just think the on the job training is
Oh,
so
it's
important.
so critical, the on the job.
Critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And a variety. Do the primary school, do the grade school, do
Yeah.
different schools. Don't go to the same three schools that are almost identical with the same group of students. Sometimes love when some teachers are, complaining about their day or whatnot. And then you say, okay, yeah, but imagine you in a public school or imagine you here. I've taught in Catholic schools, I've taught in public schools, I'm now in a Christian school. So having that variety and that chance to see the different places. I've taught in big cities. So I've done the Sydney ones, I've done the London ones, which you know about. And I did Toronto. So then
Yeah.
now I'm in smaller places now, and not the Gold Coast is small, but it's yeah, they all have their benefits, they all have their struggles to go through. I would also say to find a mentor.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the mentor that they stick with us is maybe a mentor academically. And I don't find a lot of teachers actually need that. Some may, and if you do great, that's fine. I actually find you need a mentor who personally you get on with well,
Yeah.
and that you can actually maintain not necessarily a friendship, but a career focused friendship, I guess, like an acquaintance or whatnot, people you keep in touch with, because you're going to want that same person or a person of that similar knowledge as you go on the road, because you may not have a problem your first couple of years, and then you may your third year, you don't want it all to unravel. A lot of times when we do an academic person, if it's say the head of English who's your mentor because you're teaching English, there's not always a connection between
Right.
them. And I think that connection, like with the students, I think that connection is paramount. And I think that if you have that person will be there to support you, whether they leave that place or not. They may go teach in another school, but you might still keep in contact with them. Most people I have worked with, not all, but most I have kept in contact with. It's certainly every school I've worked at, there's people that I know, still talk to, and still glean on for ideas and support, and they glean on me back. So
Yes.
it's beneficial. So as a first time teacher, look for those things that are really going to support you through the process. Because if your idea is to be in this profession for as long until you retire, which now it is 40 years, I think it'll be 50 by the time I get there to keep working. You're going to want to make sure it's something that you love and enjoy, and it challenges you and does all those things. So it is definitely something to look towards.
I think the key as well, and this is one thing it took me a while to learn in teaching, is to find that someone that you can trust, because we all know that there are teachers out there that can really sap your energy because they're very negative and they're very willing to kind of throw you under the bus at any given opportunity. And you don't want to get trapped into bad mouthing other teachers or other things about school or the kids or whatever it is. But you need that one person that you can trust, because you're going to need to vent about everything that's going on. You have to, but you need to vent to someone who is not going to then take your words and throw them back at you to someone else. Right.
Correct.
And I don't know if that made sense, but you know what I mean, to go out and talk to someone else about them, because then that's just another thing that adds on to your mental health. And I know with me, towards the end of my teaching, my years of teaching, I had that one person, and that was my colleague, my teaching colleague, and her and I would definitely, vent to each other, but we knew that it wasn't going to go any further than anybody else, than us, than the two of us, because we'd had those situations where you would just talk to anybody in the staff room and you would badmouth people or badmouth kids or whatever, the administration. And that can really cause a teacher to be sort of in a more negative space. Yes. So I definitely agree with finding the mentor and finding a mentor that you can trust, finding someone who is going to kind of guide you and help you. And because then you will also become the mentor. I think that is so important. And I just had one more thing to say before my last question to you, going back to what you said before that about being on the job as a teacher in training. Because the training in the universities, it's not always, you need to be on the job. I remember I had a student teacher and she came in and I'm like, okay, let me see your planning for this lesson. And Josh, her planning was like 12 pages long. Yeah. I was like, what's going on here? She's like, no, that's what we were taught in teachers college, that we must do this and this. I'm like, this is unrealistic.
Yeah. You cannot
this will never happen. A teacher will never have time to do 12 pages of planning for one lesson. I was like,
and that's things like learning support. They're getting better. They do much more time. When I went through, we had 4 hours, not even 4 days, 4 hours, one day of training. And it was at first, originally, I thought it was the full day, but it wasn't even that. We had stuff in the morning and stuff in the afternoon. It was the block in the middle that you had the 4 hours for support. And this is your crash course on, it then became days and then weeks where you got it. And now I think they get a full on lesson because they come out and I ask them to do NCCD work, or I ask them to do different learning support type stuff. And they're honestly better than the teachers that have been doing it for 20 years because they're used to the jargon. They're used to what to do. They know what they have to write. So in some aspects, there is good elements to it. But again, I think you could cram all that into a year and get them there more that on the job to realize I can't do these 12 pages. Maybe a unit plan could be 12 pages, but I need to break this down that I can go from there. So it's
100%.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And my last question for you, Josh, is what is one thing that you do to keep yourself calm when things get pretty chaotic?
Well, here in Australia, more recently, I play ice hockey again.
Really?
Which is, we got a place on the Gold Coast here. There's actually a few up in Brisbane, and more of the major cities have it. So that's one of the things. I think any physical activity, any opportunity, if the emotional side of things, if you want to write things down, I think is great. And if it's something you're worried about, I don't even mind if you write it down, crumple it up, and burn it or throw it away or
burn
get rid
it.
of it.
Get it out of your mind.
Not necessarily you've got to keep it and reflect on it, look back on it, although it is good to reflect, certainly. But, if you need that as well, then that's great. But if you can have that physical activity, I think a lot of people say, well, go home and have a beer or a wine or relax in that way. But I think if you can more mental health wise, if you can more physically go out and do something. So I go to the gym quite often, and I try. I've lost weight, so I've tried to continue to do that, and I come up with plans in that way. I think all of that helps support the rest of the stuff that you do in your life as well. So it all kind of works together. So if you can have plans that get you healthy, fit, and focused, then that's great. And it's a matter, can we fit that in with family and all the other pressures and everything else going on? But you have to really, and this is something I've only come to later in life, you have to prioritize you sometimes.
Should they prioritize it?
Yeah, you have to prioritize. You have to make it part. Like you have to be healthy to be able to do all those other things that you want to do to support people. Because if you are yourself, like when I will talk about myself, like when I started put on the weight, I put on about 20 kilos, and I just then wasn't as active with the kids. I wasn't doing as much as I used to do. I wasn't playing sport at the time, and it just sort of, and I probably work wise, I was a leader. So I was a leader at a school, and I was involved in a lot of stuff that went on at the school. And I've certainly there was an emergency or something that happened at the school. I was one of the people who were involved and part of it. So it was definitely time consuming. It was definitely, which was wonderful. I did love the job, but it also took away in other ways. And you've got to kind of come up with that balance of what you're looking for. So my thoughts now is even at this stage, if I was to be asked to be a leader again, I would say no at this stage, because I need to sort out a few things in my life and everything around to then be able to say, okay, I need to focus on this first before I possibly will go back to that one day.
Yeah,
But
100%.
yeah, I think it's important to get that work-life balance as best you can to work on that and find out what works best for you. And everybody's different,
Yeah.
but there are certain things you find whatever you like to do and make and fit and healthy and do it. Dancing, do whatever activities you like to do. Go
Yeah.
play pool, swim in a pool, do whatever it is. So it's yeah.
Even a
Yeah.
short walk with the kids, like after school, like just prioritizing that before. I know with me, I used to be one of the have wine when you get home teachers, right? Like I would always have wine, and my husband doesn't drink, so it was me help, I all the wine was mine. And now that once I stopped that and really started to prioritize my health a little bit more, the next day was just so much better, and from when I had been drinking wine the night before, and the next day then would just be so much more difficult because my
Yeah.
brain is
I agree.
foggy and I'm tired, and now that I don't do that, I wake up with like purpose, and I feel, and I, again, like you said, it's not for everybody, but it's just a change that I made that I'm really grateful that I did choose to make.
Yeah. I feel like you can solve the problem the next day, or at least work on the problem. Where if you do go the other way, the problem only gets greater and greater and greater.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'll
exactly.
tell you one thing. I miss our walks. You and I used to walk together and
We
whatnot.
did.
So it was always great because we walk through towns and cities and stuff like that and see the buildings and whatnot. So I think walking is a great one because you're
Yeah,
not
I
as
never walked more
physical,
than with
but
you,
you're out there,
Josh.
you're
I
doing
mean,
things.
we'd go for,
Yeah.
remember that time in Canada we were walking and someone called your mom because they were worried that why were we walking in Canada? That's
Yeah.
like not,
How come they're not driving? How come they're
why
not
are
like
they driving?
they like walking?
I agree. And a lot of our problems got solved in those walks too, like
Yeah,
we talk about
conversation.
things,
We were able to work things out and
conversations.
talk stuff through, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
excellent. So, yeah,
Exactly. Oh, Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and giving our listeners such valuable insights and information, and especially our teacher listeners. And yeah, it's just always so wonderful to see you, even though I don't get to see you in face every day, but it's okay. Once when we both have our year that we turn 50, I'm coming to Australia. So
absolutely. And I'll see you.
I'm super excited.
It'll be great.
And yeah, and thank you so much. I hope you have a really
Not that
great
far
week
off.
ahead. Yeah, not that far off. That's true. I hope you have a really great week ahead because I know with the kids starting today. Yeah, and just thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime. Keep in touch, and if you need me back on for another session or whatnot, let me know.